The next scheduling algorithm or CPU scheduler that we are looking at is priority scheduling. Okay. Priority scheduling is relatively simple. All it does is just allocate CPU to the process with the highest priority. Okay. So it is more like a scheduling approach. It's not exactly a scheduling algorithm. And we can actually use priority scheduling to implement the scheduling algorithms we just discussed. Okay. First come, first serve, and shortest job first. So we can actually, so for example, we can consider shortest job first as priority scheduling, where we set the priority based on the predicted next CPU burst time. So if for the shorter the predicted CPU burst time, the higher the priority of the process. And if we do it in that way, then we always, when we schedule the process with the highest priority, we are in fact scheduling the process with the shortest CPU burst time. The problem with priority scheduling is that it might cause the starvation. So this is also a problem for shortest job scheduling. Right? So if we have a process keep coming, and we have a process with a relatively longer CPU burst, and if we always get new processes with the shorter CPU burst, then that one with the longer CPU burst will never be able to get scheduled. So that's starvation in the special case of shortage job shortage job first scheduling. But in priority scheduling in general, we always have this starvation problem. Okay, so no matter how we decide on the priority, the processes with the low priorities may never get executed, and as a result they starve. So a simple solution to this starvation problem is to allow processes to add aging to the priority. So what aging means is that as time as time progresses, we gradually increase the priority of the processes which have not been scheduled yet. So this is what it means. It's called aging, right? So if a process, so this would allow a process with low priority to gradually increase its priority as time goes by until it has a priority that is high enough for it to be scheduled. So no matter how low the priority is, when the process is started with, eventually it will have a priority that is high enough for it to be scheduled next. So this will so aging is a technique that is commonly used to solve the problem of starvation. Okay, and starvation is a problem that that is always there whenever we have to do things based on priority. So now let's look at example priority scheduling and see how it works and how we can calculate the average waiting time for using this particular scheduler. Right, the way we do is the same. We will draw this Gantt chart. Right, we put all the processes on the Gantt chart, and based on the scheduler, how it works, and then we calculate the average waiting time. In this particular example, we have 5 processes, and they have different burst times, and they have priorities decided somehow. Okay, so now here the priorities are not determined based on CPU burst; they are determined based on something else. Okay, maybe the user can specify the priority. The user can decide which process are more important. As a result, they should have a higher priority. Okay, so in this example, actually the lower the number that we assign as the priority, the higher the priority. Right? So specifically, among all the 5 processes, right, the one with the lowest priority number is a P2. Okay, it has a priority value of 1, and this is in fact the process with the highest priority. Okay, the lower the number, the higher the priority. This is just a convention. Okay. For example, on Linux, it is also this case. The lower the number, the priority value, the higher the priority the process actually has. So we schedule P2 first because it has the higher priority. as indicated by the lowest priority value. And P2 has a CPU burst of 1, right? So it will finish at time 1. And then after P2 is done, then we look at the remaining 4 processes. P5 has the lowest priority number, right? Which means the P5 has the highest priority among the remaining 4 processes. So we schedule P5, and it has a CPU burst of 5, so it finishes at time 6. And when P5 is done, comparing P1, P3, P4, P1 has the lowest priority, and it has a CPU burst of 10, so it finishes at time 16. And then we have only P3 and P4 left. P3 has a lower priority, so P3 has lower priority, so schedule P3, and it finishes at time 18 because it has CPU burst of 2. And finally, we schedule P4, which finishes at time 19. Okay, and then based on this schedule, we can calculate the average waiting time, which gives us 8.2. Next, let's look at a scheduler that is designed for time sharing. Okay, all the schedulers we talk about so far, they are not specifically designed for time sharing. To remind you what time sharing means, is that we have multiple processes, they are sharing a single processor, and the scheduler would switch among the processes really fast and fast enough so that the user can still interact with every process. And from the user's perspective, it gets the illusion that every process owns the entire processor. Right? Is the scheduler has to switch among processes really fast enough to allow the user to interact with every process. And this scheduler is called round-robin scheduling. It is specifically designed for time sharing. It is essentially a special version of first come, first serve, okay, but with preemption. The definition for time sharing implies preemption. If you remember what preemption means, right? It means that when the CPU scheduler makes a decision, it can force the process that was on the processor before to leave the processor. Okay, and a scheduler can make a preemption when the process that was running on the processor when it was interrupted, or when it was when the I/O or event that it was waiting on was completed, right? And in those total cases, right, this is what I'm talking about, a slide that we talked about before in this chapter. Right? In both two cases, the CPU scheduling is called preemptive scheduling. So preemption implies that preemption is required in order to realize time sharing, right? Because we have a switch, right? The CPU schedule has a switch among processes, right? No matter why the process has finished its CPU burst, when the time is up, the process has to be moved out of the processor, right? No matter it has finished its CPU burst or not, right? So this requires preemption. So round-robin scheduler is essentially first come first serve, but with preemption. Okay, so we will schedule processes based on the order that they arrive, but each process only gets to execute for a period of time, okay, a share of the CPU time. Okay, and if the process does not finish its CPU burst within that period of time, the process will be preempted, and then the schedule will schedule the next one that is in the queue, right? And remember, to implement first come first serve, we can use the FIFO queue. Similarly, we can use the FIFO queue for round robin. But again, right? So when a process that is scheduled, when it finishes its share of the time, it will be moved out of the processor and inserted to the tail of the FIFO queue, and then we schedule the next process that is at the head of the FIFO queue. Okay. And for that process, it gets executed, and if it cannot finish its CPU burst before its shell is used up, its time share is used up, right? That process will also be moved out of the processor and inserted back to the ready queue, but at the tail of the ready queue, okay, at the end of the ready queue. Okay, so that's how it's done, right? So this share of CPU time that I was referring to, there's a special name for it. We call it time quantum. Okay, time quantum. Okay. So each process gets a small unit of CPU time that is called time quantum, and this time quantum is usually set between 10 milliseconds to 100 milliseconds. Okay, we talked about this before too, right? This is how frequently a scheduler, a time sharing scheduler switches among processes, right? It's generally speaking in the order of tens of milliseconds. Okay, so after this quantum has elapsed, the process is preempted and added to the end of the ready queue. So the performance of round-robin scheduling depends heavily on the size of the time quantum. Right? This goes back to the overhead we mentioned early. Okay, the overhead of the context switch. Okay, so if Q, right, if the time quantum Q is the time quantum, if Q is really large, right, in the extreme case, when the time quantum is inside to infinity, right, that the round-robin scheduler reduces to FIFO scheduler, reduces to first come first serve. Actually, so this should be first come first serve, right? Because when the time quantum is set to infinity, then essentially we are allowing every process to finish its CPU burst, and we will not preempt the process ever. Right? If the process gets to finish its we'll always be able to finish CPU burst because the time quantum is set to infinity. Right? So in that case, round-robin scheduler reduces to first come first serve. So that's a extreme case, right? Obviously, we cannot set time quantum to that large. In fact, in reality, the time quantum is pretty small. But we have to be careful. We cannot set too small because then if the time quantum is set too small, the overhead from context switch will be really high. We talk about what the context switch means, right? It's basically the process of saving the context of the previous process and load the context of the next process to execute. And that takes time. Okay? That takes time. Okay? And no matter how small the context switch overhead is, right? If the time quantum is set to too small, then the percentage of time that is spent on context switch will become significant enough. Okay? And as a result, the CPU utilization will become bad. Okay? So in essence, right, the time quantum must be large enough, okay, with respect to the context switch time. Okay, in order for the context switch time to be negligible, okay, it must be really small, okay, compared to time quantum. Okay, or in the other way around, when we set the time quantum, we can decide it based on the context switch overhead, right? Because the amount of time that the context switch requires, that's something we can measure, right? It involves the time that it takes to save the context of the previous process and load the context of the next process, right, from memory, right? So that is time we can measure. Based on that, then we can decide the appropriate time quantum value, right? And that has to be large enough with respect to the context switch time. So now let's look at an example, and let's do another example to calculate the average waiting time using the round-robin scheduler. Okay, for a set of processes. Okay, so we have three processes here. They have different CPU bursts, and the time quantum is set to 3. Okay, time quantum is set to 4. Okay, time quantum equals to 4. Yes. Okay, time quantum equals 4. And we have three processes. Assume that they come in this order: P1, P2, P3. Okay, because round robin is a special case of first come first serve. Right? So assume that they come in this order: P1, P2, P3. So we'll schedule P1 first. Okay, and P1 has CPU burst of 24. Right? But because our quantum is 4, right, we cannot allow P1 to finish its CPU burst before we schedule another process. Right? So P1 only gets to execute its quantum, which is 4, and it is preempted, okay? And then we'll schedule the next process. So P1 will be moved out of the process at time 4. Okay, and then when we preempt the process P1, it has 20 time quantum remaining. Okay, let's make a note of that, okay, because we need to use it. And then we go on and schedule P2, right? Because P2 comes slightly before P3. And for P2, it has CPU burst of 3. Right? 3 is actually smaller than the time quantum, so P2 finishes finishes CPU burst, okay, before its time quantum is used up. So P2 voluntarily leaves the processor, right? So this is one of the cases where the process voluntarily leaves the processor, right? So that's this is actually non-preemptive scheduling, right? When the process finishes CPU burst, it voluntarily leaves the processor, and the CPU schedule case comes by kind of do the scheduling again. Okay, so that's the case for P2. P2 leaves the processor and at time 7, okay, because time quantum is 3, right? And then next we schedule P3. And the P3 also has a speed burst of 3, so it also finishes before its time quantum is used up. Okay, so it leaves process at time 10. Okay, after that, right, the P2 is completely done with the speed burst, and P3 is also completely done with this speed burst. So we will have only P1 left, and P1 has 20 time quantum remaining. So we will execute P1, and it gets executed for one time quantum, which is 4. Right? At time 14, okay, the CPU scheduler is invoked and do another CPU scheduling decision. So why do we have to do that? Right? Why can't we just let P1 run non-stop? Because from in reality, from the schedule perspective, right, the schedule doesn't really know how many processes, right, that it has to schedule now, right, because the process may come dynamically. Right? In this simple example, of course, we have only 3 processes to start with, and we only have these 3 throughout this entire example. But in reality, new processes may come, right? Although P2 and P3 are done, but the other processes, for example, P4, P5 may come while P1 is running. So we still have to make a scheduling decision every time the time quantum is used up. Right, so that is why, right, we have to keep doing that, right? So then we schedule P1 for one time quantum, and we check on the remaining process. We still have just only P1, so we schedule P1 again for another time quantum, and we keep doing this, right, quantum by quantum until we finish the CPU burst, the entire CPU burst for P1, right? So we have after we finish P3, we still have 20 units of time for P1. So P1 gets execute for 5 another time quantums until it finishes. And then based on this schedule, we compute the average waiting time. We get 5.66. Let me take a look. Let me take a look at my time, so I don't go over time here. Just give me 1 minute. Okay, so I think our time is almost up. Let's see. Let me finish round robin scheduling, then we'll be done with our second makeup lecture. So this is an example of, so now we understand how round robin scheduling works, right? And let's see the effect, right? The impact of the size of time quantum. Okay. So this corresponds to what we just talked about, how what should be appropriate size of time quantum. Okay, it should be large enough with respect to the context switch time. Okay, so in this example, so we are looking at the different values of time quantum. Okay, so we have a process which has a processing time of 10. Okay, 10 units of time. If we set time quantum to 12, then there's no context switch while this process is running, because it's a CPU burst which is 10 is less than the time quantum, right? And when time quantum is set to 6, then there's only one context switch while this process is running. And if the time quantum is set to 1, there will be 10 context switches, okay, or 9 context switches, yeah, 9, okay, 9 context switches while the process is running, right? Before the process finishes entire CPU burst, right? So then based on the number of context switches, right, then we can plug in the number of the context switch time, right? So for example, if the context switch time is 2, okay, let's say context switch time is 2, let's say it's 1, okay, because 2 is kind of It's even bigger than last time quantum. Okay, if we set to 1, okay, and in the first example, right, there's no overhead, right, no overhead whatsoever, because the context switch overhead is smaller, right? We assume context switch overhead is 1. Okay, context switch overhead is 1. Context switch. Okay, overhead just OH equals to 1. Okay. In the first example, because there's 0 context switch, there's no overhead. In the second example, there's 1 context switch, the overhead is 1. Okay, so the total overhead is 1. Okay, and compared to the CPU burst, right? We spend 10 units of time on the CPU, right? So the CPU burst is 10, right? So and the overhead is 1. So 1 versus 10 is 10%. Right? We have roughly 10% overhead in the second example. But in the third example, right, we have 9 context switches, right? So total overhead is 9. Right? Then compared to the CPU processing time, which is 10, we have roughly a 90% overhead. Okay, so you see that really the context switch overhead is really significant for the last one. Why? Because the context switch overhead, right, is at the same level as the time quantum. Right? So this tells you the last one, the last setting of time quantum to 1 is really bad. Okay, it's a bad one because it's not large enough compared to the context switch overhead. Right, where the first one has the lowest overhead, the second one also has a better overhead. So so we set the context switch time. We set the time quantum, right? It is there's a trade-off there. Right? If we set the time quantum to too large, okay, then we lose the illusion of time sharing. If we set the time quantum too large and we lose the interactivity with the user, okay, the user will feel that there's lag, right? And there are lags, right? When the user is interacting with the particular process, because the process has to wait for a long time before it gets its time quantum again, right? So so when you consider that, you have to think of imagine that there are many processes, right? There are many processes running on the system. Okay, so if there are total of, say, if you have a total of 1,000 processes running, right? So 1,000 really is not a big deal, right? So by now you have all done most of your project too, right? You know that how many processes there exist, right? Typically, right? Without introducing arbitrary process using fork bomb, just typically how many processes there? Okay, there can be thousands of processes, or at least hundreds of processes just running all the time on the system. So when we have hundreds of processes or 1,000 processes, right? So it will take 100 time quantums, or the out of hundreds of time quantums or 1,000 time quantum before a process gets scheduled again, right? If there are 1,000 processes, a process has to wait 999 time quantums before it gets scheduled again, right? So if a time quantum is say 10 milliseconds, okay, if a time quantum is 10 milliseconds, it will take 10 milliseconds times 1,000, right? So that is 10 seconds. Right? That is 10 seconds before I'm doing right? So if time quantum is 10 milliseconds, right? And it had to wait for the other 999 processes to execute their time quantum before it gets scheduled again, right? So that is roughly 10 seconds. Right? A process will wait 10 seconds before it gets scheduled again, right? So that is actually pretty long, right? So for many processes, that is actually not interactive enough, right? That will make those processes lose their interactivity, and that will break the illusion that is created by time sharing. Okay? So the user will feel that these processes are not owning the entire processor. Okay, so we cannot set the time quantum to be too large, and on the other hand, we also cannot set it to too small. Right? If we set it too small, then the throughput of the system will be low. Okay, and the utilization of the system will be low, right? Because we will be spending the majority of the time of the processor on context switching, okay, rather than doing useful work. Right? So it is trade-off, right? So the bias value has to be decided based on the need for interactivity and the need of making efficient use of the processor and getting the good enough throughput, okay, for the processes. Okay. So we talk about that modern operating system. They have time quantum, okay, between 10 to 100 milliseconds, okay, and the context switch overhead is generally less than 10 microseconds. Right? So in this setting, right, then the quantum is not enough. Okay, you got 10 milliseconds compared to 10 microseconds, right? So it is 1,000 times larger. Okay, so the context switch overhead becomes really negligible. Okay, when we have such a setting. Okay, and then when we set the time quantum to 10 milliseconds, it's still good enough. Okay, for the interactivity for sake of interactivity for most processes. So that's why it is chosen. Okay, but if this is not good enough, we can further reduce it. Okay, because it's still much larger, right? Even if we reduce it to 1 millisecond, it's still 100 times larger than the context switch overhead. Okay, so let me stop here. Okay, in next lecture we're gonna start looking into more advanced scheduling algorithms. Okay, but so far we have already covered the basic ones. Okay, we will continue our CPU scheduling chapter. Okay, in the next makeup lecture video.